Ben Shapiro and Anna Kasparian are going to fight over the national debt. I'm assuming Ben Shapiro has a conservative stance on this, which means we should lower the national debt, probably by cutting government spending. I'm assuming Anna Kasparian has a liberal view on this, which is the national debt doesn't matter and we need to keep spending because the programs are very important and impact people very deeply. Let me see if I am correct.
Well, a testy moment from a CNN panel featuring Anna Kasparian, Ben Shapiro, and Scott Jennings, all people I like, went viral on social media after the two conservatives, they dragged Kasparian for suggesting that foreign aid and defense spending accounted for a larger share of the deficit than entitlements.
Oof, yes, that's clearly not the case. It's not even close. Entitlements are an absolute blowout. They constitute, I'm going to just pull a number out of my head. I don't know off the top of my head. I'm going to say like 50 to 60% of the budget. I think it is the majority. I think it's like sort of like the vast majority. I think defense spending is something like 20%, let's say. I'm going to say, let me see how wrong I am.
Let's watch.
Our national debt shot up significantly after 9/11, after we started invading countries in the Middle East.
You should look at a chart.
Now we're at 30.
In 2008,
we're spending hundreds of billions of dollars on Israel, on Ukraine. I mean, honestly, these foreign conflicts have a lot more to do with our national debt as opposed to us paying into
you think Israel is a bigger portion of our budget than Social Security, Medicare,
I think we
Medicaid?
spend way too much money on military aid for foreign countries.
You think Israel is more
Do
than
you
Social
think
Security?
that Social Security is more of an issue compared to how much money we just shell out for conflicts abroad?
As a matter of
The truth of the
expenditures and
matter
math,
is that
yes.
both investments and defense.
So love Anna, love Scott,
Yeah.
love Ben.
Okay, so I didn't get any numbers. All right, come on, man. It's facts, not feelings. I want to get those numbers.
And I think she was mostly on totally solid ground.
Yeah.
Where she went a little awry was
She was. Let's be totally honest here, and let's be fair to Anna. She is correct. She was talking about the issue. Ben and Scott Jennings were basically trying to frame this in terms of, numbers, in terms of dollars spent, as opposed to how much of an issue is it for regular people? How much do people care about foreign wars versus domestic issues in terms of, spending on entitlements like Social Security and these types of things? Obviously, people care way more about their Social Security benefits, about their Medicare benefits, about all of these types of things because they directly affect you if you're taking part of those programs. And if you're not taking part in those programs, you probably know somebody who is. You probably have a grandparent or an uncle or something like that who is on some sort of government assistance. And therefore, those issues are much more near and dear to your heart, but they are also mathematically a much, much larger portion of government expenditure. And therefore, if you actually want to deal with the national debt, unfortunately, you are going to have to deal with those programs much more so than you are with anything else. You could literally slash the entire military budget to zero. And if the other entitlement programs are still left exactly the way they are, and they're never left exactly the way they are, they're almost always growing because it's a popular issue to basically say, hey, we want to get more benefits for people. Politicians get elected on that, so it usually grows. But even if you were to keep it exactly as it were, the amount of new people going into those programs would basically mean that the debt would still go up because we would, even if you slash the military budget to zero, it would just increase slightly slower. That's it. It's crazy.
when she's more, accounting for a greater share of the deficit on the foreign spending. There's that famous pie chart we can all look at where I think Social Security and medical expenses together are about half of the deficit, and then defense is a large category. Foreign aid is actually not so much, and I'm for getting rid of all of it regardless. Gone. I've never met with any spending I want to continue doing.
President Suave will abolish all these things that are still.
Indeed. Now Ben and Scott support the spending for Israel, so that's probably why they wanted to fight.
Right. So I'm going to defend Anna a little bit on this, partly because I think it has been misrepresented somewhat what she actually said, not by you, but
I think he's probably going to mention the exact same thing that I did, which is she's talking about the issue in terms of how important is it to the American people, these entitlement programs versus foreign entanglements, wars, military spending in general, or specifically, foreign aid to Israel or Ukraine or something like that. Which do we care about more? Obviously, we care about the domestic issues, and domestic issues include entitlements. That's very clear and is borne out in the overwhelming victory of Donald Trump, is that people care more about American domestic issues right now than they do foreign wars or entanglements.
Partly by Scott and others on X, because they are presenting it as if she said the cost of aid to Israel is greater than Social Security, which it obviously isn't. But it seems to me, and I think it was reflected in that clip, her argument is a bit more nuanced than that. Her argument, as I understand it, is it is automatic that we would have to pay and want to pay Social Security to save people from penury, and Medicare and Medicaid for similar reasons, but it is optional spending, discretionary spending, that we decide to give that further inflates the debt and contributes to fiscal problems.
Okay, so this is a good point, and it's fair, but I will also say she was not making that argument. There could be larger context. I would encourage you to go find that actual clip, not only the full clip, but the full context, what happened before and after. Watch the whole thing. My guess is you're not going to do that because who does that these days? In the clip, she does not make that argument, so I cannot refute what he's saying. And certainly, this is a salient point that the entitlement spendings are basically baked in. We're not going to get rid of them without some significant doing in Congress and maybe the executive branch, whatever. It'd be a big deal to deal with those things, as opposed to foreign aid spending, and these types of things are kind of optional. They're on the table, and you can take them off the table most of the time, and therefore spending more money on that stuff is the stuff that's actually increasing the debt, because it's spending on indulgences that we don't need. It's like, okay, we've got to buy groceries, we've got to pay rent, we got to do this kind of stuff. Okay, that's your normal debt expenditure as a person. If you were to then say, okay, well, now I'm going to get like a big crazy car payment, I'm going to buy like a super expensive car, and I'm going to get that on top of it. Well, that you don't need that. Let's say you already have a car. You don't need a new, bigger car expenditure, and therefore that spending is, inflating the debt that you would have to be paying later on down the line. Now, the difference here is that, if we're going to extend that analogy, okay, well, that car payment would be, a very small increase compared to your house payments, your rent payments, your groceries, because you're spending an enormous, inordinate amount on groceries. You're only shopping at Erewhon, and you're only buying the most expensive Wagyu beef, and you're only your house is a $20 million mansion in Beverly Hills that you can't afford. You could never have afforded that realistically. So you're always just grabbing new credit cards to max them out so that you can pay the loan payment for that month, or the interest on the loan payment, or something like that. So actually, like, going out and buying a car, while yes, a stupid, terrible financial move, it's digging you deeper into the hole, but you've got an excavator excavating out an enormous hole right alongside you, which is like, okay, well, that's going to dig you further down, deeper, faster than this car payment. It's a salient point, but again, she's not making that point in the clip.
As I understand her line of thinking, it is that we can't and shouldn't get rid of those other social programs. We should look at the things that we could get rid of. And she is arguing, as I would argue, and as you would argue, that spending to Israel is one of those things, because it is vast and because it has also contributed and underwritten just an absolute slaughter, in my view, in Gaza.
Right, and we don't anymore get a constraint on Israel's behavior out of it. It used to be we're giving them this money, but we have some say then over their foreign policy. And Joe Biden, for whatever reason, decided to just completely ignore that part of it. And Trump has, with some kind of small interruptions to the Gaza policy, it's still basically Israel does whatever they want, which is part of the reason that among young conservatives, continuing to give money to Israel is, I'm glad to say, very, very unpopular. This is something I think Israel should give up even for its own PR with the American people, frankly.
Yeah, and I mean, and that is definitely the argument here. Now, what do you think? In terms of if you are at the top of the government, if you are in that scenario of like the well-being of America as a country and all of its citizens is my responsibility, and it is therefore my duty to enact policies that benefit them, what am I going to do? These social programs, these entitlement programs, are popular in the sense that to repeal them would be massively unpopular. And it would affect people. It would absolutely negatively affect people. So it's understandable to say, you know, we're not going to do anything with this. We can't do anything with this. It's not true. You absolutely can get rid of those things. And I mean, I have to unfortunately argue we should at the very least, you know, pare them back a little bit to the point where we could actually start tackling this national debt, because that's a way bigger problem in the future. But you also do have to acknowledge the fact that foreign policy does have an effect on American citizens. You know, it's not necessarily true that it's going to affect you in the same way in a day-to-day sense that, you know, Medicare cuts would. However, it's also fair to say that, yeah, in the future, it might have a bigger impact. You know, it could absolutely have a bigger impact if, you know, you cut foreign aid, you know, AID, intervention stuff, where it's just like, okay, we are spending this money to have influence around the world. All right. And that influence around the world is going to come back as, you know, as an investment in other things. So we have, you know, a stable supply of oil. We have a stable supply of shipping and transport around the world. We have, you know, secure maritime trade. We have all of these types of things, which actually do have some degree of, you know, benefit for the American people. Now, I'm happy to have the debate and argument on, you know, are we spending it wisely? Are we spending it well? Should we be redistributing it to other things? Happy to have that conversation, and we almost certainly should. Right? And Israel would be one of those places where you go, yeah, probably we're spending too much. We're not getting enough for our dollar. You know, the juice is not worth the squeeze. I would agree with that. However, it's not a cut and dry issue. It's not a, you know, foreign aid is, you know, military spending, whatever, is completely superfluous. We don't need it at all. But these entitlement programs, you know, Social Security, Medicare, these types of things, those are sacrosanct. We absolutely have to have them. It's like, no. It's all on the table or none of it's on the table. You can have the debate about where we should put our money, or you don't. If you do, then everything's on the table and everything needs to be looked at from this perspective of, are we getting our money's worth here?
So yeah, happy to see that go. Happy to see a lot of other defense categories reduced. One of our Libertarian Party candidates, Gary Johnson, had a plan to cut defense spending by 50%. I think that sounds great to me. A lot of foreign bases that could be closed that are not only not necessary, but invite attacks on our troops, because we have, you know, small numbers of troops stationed in, you know, various countries in Africa. And
very true. Although I will say, I don't think our base expenditure is like really a significant portion of the budget. It's fair to be like, look, you know, why are we there? There's no point. Absolutely. I don't think it saves us a ton of money. It does save us some, which is not nothing, but I don't think it's like, you know, going to make or break us defense budget wise.
There's fighting there, and if we come under attack, then we have some obligation to respond, but we don't want to do that, but we have to if we're there and we get attacked. So it's just like inviting us to be more involved when we don't need to be. So I would close those. On the entitlement stuff, which is what kicked off the discussion, Ben Shapiro has for a long time said this, and I agree with him that people live. We pegged the retirement age for Social Security to a time period where life expectancy was much lower. People retired. They didn't live so much longer beyond that, and so it made more sense. And I don't want to keep old people, digging in the coal mines, but people live longer, and some employees can retire really early and in terms of their life expectancy.
Right. So it is a valid point to note things like the life expectancy, to note that the programs were designed when we just didn't expect people to live so long. The actuarial argument is there. One of the things that I think, though, is difficult and frankly a bit distasteful to me is people who argue for raising the retirement age are almost all working in the kind of cushy jobs that you and I have, where we're sitting in chairs shooting our mouths out of it.
Yeah, I mean, I will say again, I think he kind of has the typical British attitude about this, which I don't know if we watched the video on this, but it is this thing of where are these programs getting their money from? Like the retirement funds, all of these types of things, they're taking the money out of your pocket to do this. You're not deciding how much, of your earnings are going to go into a retirement fund. Other countries, your democratic socialist countries, your what is it? I want to say Sweden. I could be wrong about the exact country, but basically there are countries out there that do this type of thing, and they all have, very significant, retirement funds for these things, but they're all done through the specific industries. So every industry gets to negotiate and gets to figure out, all right, well, like, when do we want to retire? How much money are we willing to sacrifice in each of our paychecks to do this? And we then get, like a really good pension fund. And it's not that we're taking, money from all the people around. They're all paying into it, and then they're all paying into it for, a specific thing that, applies to everybody. It's just like, it doesn't make any sense. And again, it clearly doesn't work. It's not good. And the other argument that, who was this? This was V, I think, from like Romanian TV, made the argument that, look, this is the grift. Like it is the grift, that this is what's paying for all of these like horrible programs. This is how you're underwriting, like the CIA, you're underwriting, some authoritarian measures, is that you're collecting money for Social Security, but you're not spending it all on Social Security. You're going, we're taking, 50% of every one of your paychecks. And yeah, some of that goes to, this program that, you say you like and is ostensibly a good idea because, all right, we're making sure that, your grandmother doesn't, freeze to death in the winter or doesn't, starve to death. But it's also going to, we're going to spend some of that for whatever. We're going to spend some of that to, build a road to nowhere. We're going to spend some of that on, some spy operation in some country that you've never heard about. We're going to spend some of it on, spying on Americans. We're going to spend some of this on, if you're in Britain, regulating your speech and, arresting your uncle for making a spicy meme. All of that stuff is there in very real terms because of the fact that you have this big giant welfare state, and that politicians can say, we're collecting your taxes for these, issues that most people can go, yeah, I like that. That makes sense. Of course, I don't want, I don't want to be, having to work into my 90s, breaking rocks on the side of the road. That would be horrible. I don't want that. So yeah, I'm willing to put down some money for like a retirement fund for me. Okay, that's great, except it's not for you, it's for everybody else. And actually right now, the money that you're putting into this, you're never going to see. It's not going to be there. It's not going to be there because, your grandmother or, somebody else's grandmother is sucking up all of that stuff, and they're using it and they're living to, 100. When you get to be, 65, 70, you're not going to be able to touch any of that because it's going to be gone. It's not going to exist. And the other factor that's involved there is the national debt skyrocketing under all of these entitlement programs is going to also affect you. So not only are you not getting what you paid for in terms of your taxes for these entitlement programs, you're also incurring a massive debt that you probably are going to have to pay. The people who are benefiting from this stuff now are probably really not going to be hurt by, the debt crisis, hyperinflation or some, massive depression or something like that. They're not going to have to deal with that because they're going to be, they're going to be gone. But you will. So you don't have any of the investment that you made in your retirement fund. That's gone. Plus, you now have, massive economic hardships because of these policies that benefited those people. And it's probably not a good idea. Just off the top of my head, I'm just thinking. And, so again, the British welfare state viewpoint on these things, I don't like, and is kind of more distasteful to me, especially with all of the UK authoritarianism that's happening, that is being funded in large part because of the welfare state. They can campaign and say, this is for the NHS. That's why we're doing this. Okay, but the Ofcom stuff and, we're arresting you for memes. How are we paying for those police? Well, money that we said we were collecting for the NHS.
But awful bad things. And if you're working in a steelworks or you're stacking shelves or you're working in a shipyard, which, is a declining form of employment in this country, but nevertheless, if you're doing heavy physical work, the idea that, you could just retire at 69 or 71 rather than 65, yeah, that's easier done in our game than it is in lots of others.
I mean, I hear you, and which is why I celebrate to some extent the decline of factory work in this country. I don't want people to lose jobs, but if we replace those jobs with white-collar jobs or more technical jobs, and we, ship that overseas. Everybody hates outsourcing. People hate work being done anywhere else, but the progress of human civilization, right, is from backbreaking farm labor to less backbreaking factory work, right? People left farms in your home country. They
from
left
agrarian societies to different
to industrial work because it actually was, even though it seems very labor intensive to us, it was less labor intensive than farming. And then you move from that to modernity. So that's a good progress. The only other thing I'll say on changing the age, it's just like, to me, and I bring this up a lot, the scales, in my view, and you might have a different view, of kind of redistribution in America are, in my view, very over time weighted toward older people. Amount of, in terms of healthcare costs.
Niall might have a different take on this, but it's not even a question. It's clearly the case. And it would seem very obvious, right? Older people are people that are, more experienced, and therefore they're going to be more in charge. Like, there's way more old people in government, in, executive positions, in managerial positions, in positions of, power. They have, employees. They are much more so, the employers than they are the employees. And therefore, they have a greater say in this stuff. So of course, they're, if they're all looking out for their individual interests, they're going to say, we want all of these policies. And it just so happens that all of these policies advantage us at the cost of other people. So of course that's going to be the case. And I mean, it is the case. It is absolutely the case. The other aspect, which he probably will mention, is that older people right now in this generation specifically have it easier. Like they had it easier. They had a upbringing in an environment that was more conducive to accruing wealth because there was kind of like more to go around. And I will say 100 times, this is boomers made their money not because they were savvy or, not even really because of tax policy probably, but in large portion because, everybody died in World War II. And therefore the supply of these finite resources like land or property, these things basically went up because there were fewer people competing for it. And therefore they were able to get more of it at a cheaper price. And then of course there's other like monetary policies and these like, going off the gold standard, going to a fiat currency, blah, 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 blah. All of that stuff true. But essentially they had all of these things leveraged helping them out. So that's why they're so much richer than, people would be today, like in my generation or future generations. And therefore, doing this wealth redistribution, making it even better for them is crazy. And, it really hurts people that are trying to do stuff nowadays, that are younger, they're the people who are paying for all of these things. Okay. And they're not going to see any of it. They're not going to see any of the benefits of this.
The amount of money we are spending as a society, and maybe that takes systemic reform so that it's not spent that way, but on people in the last 10, 20, 30 years of their life in terms of their health care, the support they get in terms of Social Security, compared to young people who, to some extent, are having trouble buying houses or affording childcare, those kinds of things. It's so tipped that way, and to be confiscating more and more resources from younger people so that older people can live so comfortably does bother me.
I think I have a more magnanimous view. Maybe it's just I'm older than you, and it's not looming quite so far in the distance for me as it is for you.
Not going to be slinging takes on Rising and Free Media.
Not in 20 years' time, I don't think. But the point about it is, I do, of course I do think that obviously older people, as a rule, suffer greater health problems. And as a rule, their earning potential is much lower because most of them have finished their working life. Some of them have assets that they've built up over a lifetime, and that's fine. But you don't want people in the twilight of their lives to be in poverty because of healthcare costs or any other reason. So I think it's fine. Look, I mean, knock on wood, the amount...
Okay, we could also say, is it fair for those people to be a burden on, like, to be looked at as a burden on society? Like, I mean, the amount of venom and vitriol I hear people lob at boomers, like when you say boomers, it's like, it's such a horrible word. Like, it has so much vitriol behind it. When someone says these boomers, they hate them. They hate them. Why? Because there is like a real understanding that it's like, yeah, you kind of did put us in this position. It is really, in a lot of ways, your fault that things are so tough now for the current generation. And you're kind of sitting easy. So, I mean, is it fair for, these policies to be putting, that older generation, casting them as the villain in our mind? I don't know. So, I mean, and again, I mean, it doesn't have to be this way. It doesn't have to be this way. Like I said, I mentioned, pension programs in like Scandinavian countries. I think I said Sweden. I don't know if it was Sweden specifically, but there are other ways to do a, program that makes it so that old people are not impoverished, but are also not, like a burden. They're not, sucking the wealth and labor out of younger generations to pay for their, ongoing lifestyle. And there's also something to be said for, like, I don't know if you have an old grandmother, but I mean, mine says all the time, I'm ready to go. I'm ready to go. I don't need to be around here anymore. I don't have anything else to do. I'm ready to, yeah. So, I mean, like, what benefit is it to be paying for her when she's like, I would, I can die. It's not a problem. I don't need to be, put through, the most incredible life-saving stuff, spend, $10 million to keep me alive in, like pain and suffering, aches and pains, can barely, control my bodily functions for another 6 months to a year. It's like, no, like, don't do that. But again, when you hear people talk about boomers, that's the sense that they get, is that they're holding on for that extra 3 months, that extra 6 months at exorbitant costs. And it does, like, it fosters this real sense of animosity towards them. And I don't know if that's fair.
I have paid in health premiums. Like the health companies have definitely made a profit from me over the past 10 or 15 years because thankfully I haven't required any medical treatment. I hate health insurance companies, but I don't mind that basic equation that younger people pay more because we don't want, just as I say, people really in dire straits at the end of their lives.
Well, so that's not the thing. The model for all of this health insurance stuff or all of this, Social Security stuff, all of that stuff is not young people pay more and they're healthier and therefore, they go, it's like, no. The model is, and always should be, they are investing in their future. They're putting this money away when they are healthy, when they don't have medical issues, so that in the future, when they do, and they are older and they're not able to work as much, or, realistically, a lot of people can work happily into their, 80s, 90s or whatever, and they do. If they've got, and look, here's the other side of this. If they've got jobs where they can do that, generally speaking, they're making more money because they have the greater experience. They've got, way more citations. If they're a professor, they've got a much greater wealth of expertise and knowledge to share. And therefore, their pay is commensurate with that. So, it's crazy to think, the young people should be paying more because we want the old people. It's like, no. Young people should be paying more now so that they don't have to pay as much later. They've got that nest egg saved up in the future. And realistically, if they live their life in such a way that they're healthy and, they live a good full lifetime, therefore the money they save can go on to their kids. They go, yeah, this was me spending wisely. I invested my money when I was young. I saved it for a rainy day in the future if there was an emergency. I lived my life in such a way that emergencies didn't happen. And now I've got a lot of money to pass on to my kids. That is the plan that it should be. It's not, we should take from the young to give to the old because we don't want the old people to be. It's like, no. That's ridiculous. That's insane.
Yeah, the healthcare system, we all agree, is just so messed up.
It is.
I think it would benefit either way. It could, maybe a more socialist system would be better, or a more free market system would be better. I just went to the doctor, earlier today for an annual checkup, and it's like, oh, do you want this test done? Do you want this thing done? I don't exercise any direction over that because I have no idea what it costs or what I'm paying for, or if I'm paying for it's going to some third party and I might find out later that it costs, I have no idea, and that leads to bad decision making. It's unlike any other service you pay for where you basically know what it costs and then whether it's in your interest to do it. Which seems dumb. It just seems dumb to me.
Just very briefly on that point, a cultural reference point or a cultural difference I've had to get accustomed to. In Ireland or Britain, when you go to the doctor, typically, unless you're bleeding or falling over, it's like, oh, come back to us another couple of weeks unless, if it gets worse. Here, it's like, well, we better test you in case there's the 1 in 7 million chance that you're about to die of a horrible, ailment. And I've had to readjust my mind to not think that means I have the horrible ailment.
Right. And and that is something to consider is that, again, look, Niall, his point, his, take on this is going to be viewed from a British perspective, which is really more of a left-wing mindset. It just is. Maybe that's a good thing, but that's one of the drawbacks to having a socialized system of, healthcare and medicine is that you can easily, be made to wait. Canada's the same thing. Unless you're dying, come back later. Okay, so we have you have a brain tumor. It's like, all right, we can get you in for an MRI in 6 months. Pretty sure I've got a cancerous brain tumor. I'm sorry, it's just the way it goes. We got 6 months backlog, so we'll get you when we can get to you. If it gets worse, maybe we'll reevaluate. But for right now, that's what we're scheduling you for. America's not that way. You can absolutely get an MRI the same day if you are willing to pay for it, and that is, I think, something that most people would probably be willing to go, yeah, I'll pay for that. Even if I have to pay on an installment plan, we'll do something like that. Okay. So, again, it's there's no solutions. There's only trade-offs. And which one are we willing to go for? What trade-offs are worthwhile if we're talking about, entitlement spending versus military spending versus, the consequences of, national debt skyrocketing uncontrollably? Where do we lie on that? Let me know down in the comments. Thank you for your time and attention. Farewell for now.